and welcome to our Protect and Improve Your Memory series. This is part 2, dealing primarily with nutrition, but I'm sure Jenny will take whatever questions you might have. And also then I wanted to tell you a little bit about Jenny Lobb, our speaker. She's a family and consumer sciences educator for the OSU Extension in Franklin County. She holds a bachelor's degree in human nutrition and a master's degree in public health, both from OSU. Jenny is also a registered and licensed dietitian in the state of Ohio. She is an extension educator and specializes in food, nutrition, and wellness. And if you've come to a lot of the programs here at Bexley, you'll know that Jenny has provided many very informative programs over the years for us. So I am going to turn it over to Jenny, and thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Jenny, for providing this program.
All right, well, thank you, Sue, and thanks for coming out today. I see a few familiar faces from last time, and I know we had some weather challenges last week, or at least the threat of the weather that was coming. So if you didn't make it to last week's lesson, that is fine. As Sue mentioned, the recording's available for you to view if you would like. And we'll just do a really quick recap of last week before we jump into how nutrition can impact memory today. So last week we talked more about how memory works, just providing an overview. We talked about crystallized versus fluid intelligence. Crystallized being that intelligence that is solid, it's hardened over the years, it's there for you to recall. And that tends to remain pretty stable over time. We build upon that through the years as we gain vocabulary and experience and judgment and so forth. Whereas fluid intelligence is our speed of processing information. And that is what tends to decline with time. So it's not that you're any less intelligent, it's just sometimes that our speed of recall is impacted. We talked about the different types of memory, sensory, short-term and long-term, and long-term being what we are able to recall. Short-term, we may store for a few minutes and then we let go after we've made use of that information, and long-term can last forever. Although we talked about how you can't recall information if you don't take it in the first place. And so we talked about our learning styles and how we learn information that we then can later recall. And most of us are a mix of the different types of learners, but we tend to have one primary style. So some of us are auditory learners, some of us are visual learners, some of us are kinesthetic learners. And we mentioned briefly that physical conditions could impact your ability to take in information and then later recall that information. For example, if you're an auditory learner and you have hearing loss, or if you're a visual learner and your vision is impaired, or if you're a kinesthetic learner and your mobility is impacted. We'll talk more about that in the 4th session. And then last week, we went over some strategies to help with recall, concentration, where you're focusing your attention on information, association, using links and cues to help with recall later on, repetition, repeating or reciting information, and then relaxation, which isn't necessarily a recall strategy, but it does help with recall. When we're stressed, it's harder to recall information than if we relax. And along with these, we talked about some mental exercises, things like crossword puzzles or reading or doing new courses, or other, professional development or just mental stimulating activities that can help keep our minds active and sharp. So did anyone try something new this past week? Maybe using one of the strategies or a new mental exercise? Oh, started Wordle. Okay. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about how nutrition and how we fuel our brain can impact our memory. And it's pretty amazing. Our brain only makes up about 2% of our body weight, yet it requires about a third of our body's available energy resources. So without proper nutrition, the energy to fuel your brain is taken from other parts of your body, bodily functions, or it's not there at all. And most of the chemicals that the brain needs to function are derived from food. So has anyone ever heard that you are what you eat? Yeah, so there is some truth to that. Your diet can affect your memory and your overall brain function. There are a variety of nutrients that contribute to memory, and we'll talk a little bit about those, but we'll move into talking about dietary plans or eating approaches. I like to focus on, the diet as a whole versus honing in on specific nutrients. We think of what we eat in terms of food, not nutrients. So looking at a dietary pattern when we're eating a variety of healthy foods should, in theory, provide your body with the nutrients that it needs to function. There are several nutrients that may play a role in keeping your brain healthy. The B complex vitamins are one. Vitamin B1, which is thiamine, can affect the amount of energy in your body cells. And if you're short on energy or short on that vitamin, it may slow your mental function. But as I said, those B vitamins are important, but rather than focusing specifically on, am I getting enough B1? Am I getting enough B6? So on and so forth. We'll think more about the diet as a whole. And if you are concerned about whether you're getting enough nutrients in your diet, you can consult a dietitian, and they can do an individual consult to see if there are specific food groups containing needed nutrients that may be lacking. In general, if you're eating from all the major food groups, you're on the right track. I do caution people, if you're following a diet where you're eliminating a major food group for one reason or another, it's definitely worth talking to a doctor or a dietitian to make sure that you're still getting the nutrients that you need. And they may recommend a supplement of some sort. Through a balanced diet, most people get enough nutrients, and deficiencies tend to be rare, but that is a generalization. So if you feel like you are falling through the cracks, or you're a little sluggish, or you just have a concern, it's worth talking with your healthcare provider about. And they may recommend a multivitamin, they may recommend a specific supplement. So supplements like vitamin D or zinc may be warranted in certain situations. However, you always want to talk with your healthcare provider before you start taking a supplement, because it is possible to overdose, in a sense, on those. So you want to consult with a healthcare provider. And a word of caution about over-the-counter supplements. Next week, we'll talk about medications, and this will come up again. But, there are some supplements out there that are marketed. They have advertisements. They're marketed as products that can improve memory. But those claims are not regulated. These are not tested. These supplements, these products do not go through research trials like medications do. And they can have a serious impact on your health, especially if you're taking other medications. They may interact with other medications that you're taking. So always, always consult with the healthcare provider if you do choose to take a supplement. You know, some of them may be helpful, but some of them may be harmful, especially if you are on other medications or you have certain conditions. So we're going to transition now to talking about the nutrients to the food plans, but I'll pause a moment here. Any questions so far before we move on? Yeah, so the question for those online is, what about herbs? You know, some herbs have these purported health benefits too, and are said to improve memory. To a degree, I would, you know, exercise caution. It's never a bad call to ask a doctor or even a pharmacist. Pharmacists are very knowledgeable, and you could ask a pharmacist because they are going to know what other medications you're taking, and some of those herbs too may have interactions with other medications. And so having the outside input of a health professional it's better, in my opinion, to err on the side of caution that way. Yes. So the question again for those online is, what if doctors and pharmacists don't have nutrition training? They're not required to have nutrition training. That is true. There are some programs that are starting to incorporate it, and there are some, you know, more of a push to recognize food as medicine. In this regard, you know, a dietitian would be more knowledgeable if you have access to a dietitian. That being said, a pharmacist is going to know very well potential food-drug interactions better than I would, even though I am a dietitian by training. I didn't receive as much training in that regard as I would expect a pharmacist to. So when we're talking about the potential to cause harm, a pharmacist would be knowledgeable in that regard. All right, so let's look at some eating plans. Again, the idea here being choosing food rather than trying to select these individual nutrients. So one common one that we teach in Extension is MyPlate, which is our USDA eating plan based on the dietary guidelines for Americans. And those guidelines, if you're not familiar with them, are updated every 5 years. They're reviewed by a panel of experts to reflect the most current dietary research and advice. They're not, you know, they're not perfect, but they are current. And the idea here is that we're eating what's on the plate. So aiming to fill half the plate with fruits and vegetables, focusing on whole grains, lean proteins, low-fat dairy, and then limiting what's not pictured here. Things like sweets, processed foods that are high in added sodium and saturated fat. So that's one approach. Another one is the Mediterranean diet, which is a diet that's been around a long time. It's based on the traditional cuisine of countries bordering the Mediterranean Sea, and it has been shown to promote health and prevent chronic disease. I always like to ask, what do you notice when you look at this picture that's up on the screen here? Tons of fruits and vegetables. The focus is on fruits and vegetables. So that is intentional. The focus being on plant-based foods first, fruits and vegetables over meat. There's olive oil. So the Mediterranean diet does emphasize daily consumption of those plant-based foods, vegetables, fruits, whole grains, and healthy fats coming from olive oil, coming from fish. Weekly consumption of fish, poultry, beans, and eggs. So you see there when we are consuming protein, it's coming from fish, it's coming from plant-based sources, it's coming from lean protein, lean meat sources like poultry and eggs. And then there's moderate portions of dairy, limited intake of red meats. And another cornerstone of the Mediterranean diet is meals shared with others, which is interesting as we kind of touched on a little bit and will more. There is something to be said about how interaction with others helps sharpen and protect our memory. And then the final one I'll share is the DASH diet, which stands for Dietary Approach to Stop Hypertension. This is another research-based diet that has been shown to help prevent hypertension, high blood pressure, as well as help those who have high blood pressure manage their blood pressure. And so like the other plans I've shown so far, it's focused on the fruits and vegetables, the whole grains, lean meats, and plant-based proteins, limited saturated fat and cholesterol, and then limited sweets and added sugar. And then a final one is a hybrid of those last two I just showed. So the Mediterranean DASH diet, those have kind of been combined to create something called a MIND diet, which is an acronym, but it's a mouthful. It's the Mediterranean DASH Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. And this one has been researched and shown to actually prevent the onset and progression of Alzheimer's disease. It's a little bit more specific than the others. Its primary components are again fruits and vegetables, but it goes farther to specify your leafy green vegetables, encouraging daily consumption of leafy greens, your nuts, daily consumption of nuts, berries, 2 or more servings a week of berries, beans, at least 3 servings a week. So emphasizing the plant-based protein that is in beans, whole grains, and whole grains we consume daily as our bodies need that fuel, as opposed to the refined grains. Fish, so fish at least once a week, and then poultry twice a week. So the protein is broken down to beans, fish, and poultry. Those are the proteins that compose this diet. And then olive oil is used as the main cooking oil here. So if you want to learn more about the MIND diet, you can look it up online, or I do have some resources. If you want to reach out to me, I can share specific information about this diet. Yes. I'm just checking my notes. So it is limited. So it says red meat is limited to less than 4 servings a week. Butter is limited, emphasis on olive oil. Cheese is limited to once a week. Pastries and sweets are limited, and fast or fried food are limited. So the things on the screen are things, like when I say beans 3 times a week, it's more of a 3 or more. Whereas the cheese, it's recommended that it's once a week or less. So again, this is like the version that's been studied in research trials. So you don't have to follow it perfectly to reap benefits, but consuming a diet that is, emphasizing those vegetables, the whole grains, the plant-based proteins, the lean proteins, utilizing your olive oil or your oils really instead of butter or margarine. Those are all the types of components of a diet that contribute to health benefits. Memory benefits, heart health benefits, just overall health and prevention of disease. And consuming a diet like any of these ones mentioned. So, the first 3, MyPlate, Mediterranean diet, DASH diet, they all kind of have the same components. This one's just a little bit more strict here, but consuming any sort of diet that emphasizes those main components can help prevent conditions that do impact memory. So for example, clogged arteries, high blood pressure, and then dehydration we'll also mention. But clogged arteries and high blood pressure, we often think about in regard to our heart health. But the reality is that our blood flows both to our heart and our brain. So preventing clogged arteries and high blood pressure also helps protect our memory. So looking at clogged arteries, like all parts of the body, the brain needs adequate blood flow to function. And clogging of the arteries when plaque develops inside your blood vessels can result in reduced blood flow. That can lead to a stroke if it goes uncontrolled. That's kind of the most severe consequence. Regardless, even if it doesn't escalate all the way to a stroke, without proper blood flow, the brain can't get the oxygen and the nutrients that it needs to function most effectively. So consuming one of those diets that emphasizes those major food groups, fruits and vegetables, whole grains, lean proteins, to get the nutrients our need can also help prevent clogged arteries and protect memory. Can also prevent hypertension. So when you have high blood pressure, hypertension, the force of your blood against your artery walls is too strong. And that can damage your blood flow, both to the heart as well as to the brain. And this too can cause stroke or even mini strokes. It can also stiffen blood vessels in the brain, which reduces blood flow. So one of the best things you can do to prevent high blood pressure or hypertension is to limit your sodium intake, your salt intake. And most of our salt doesn't come from the salt shaker. Where do you think most of the salt in our diets is coming from? Processed foods, yes. So processed foods and restaurant foods, especially fast foods. So if you're eating those fruits and vegetables, whether they be fresh or whether they be minimally processed, like canned and frozen, whole grains, lean proteins, eating those components of that healthy diet pattern, that can help prevent high blood pressure as well. I tell people, one of the best things you can do if you're concerned about your blood pressure is maybe instead of buying the canned soup, just make your own soup at home, or find the alternatives to the fast food that you can make at home without all the added sodium to them. So high blood pressure. I did bring, so February is Heart Health Month, if you didn't know. And so for those of you in the room, I did have some copies of this one-page handout that I brought with me, how to manage blood pressure, if you're interested in taking one with you. So normal blood pressure is considered less than 120/80, and you can help maintain a normal blood pressure by what you eat as well as exercising, moving more. All right, then the last condition we'll talk about that is impacted by nutrition, although we often don't think about this as a condition, is dehydration. So dehydration, of course, is what happens when we don't drink enough water or when our body loses large amounts of fluid. And this is a problem because water performs many functions in our body, but it helps to transport oxygen and nutrients throughout the body into the brain. So if you don't have enough water circulating in your body, you may not be getting the fuel that your brain needs to function. And our sense of thirst does decline with age. So if you can, make sure you're drinking water throughout the day, but also know that foods like our fresh fruits and vegetables contain water, and those contribute to hydration and help prevent dehydration. I do also want to, so part of this specific lesson covers some factors that may affect the nutritional intake of older adults. So I do want to cover these today. There are things that you may notice perhaps in maybe in yourself, but maybe in a loved one, if you're caring for an aging parent, for example. There are some things that can impact the nutritional intake of older adults, which can then impact our health and our memory if we're not getting the nutrients that we need. So sensory changes are one. If your eyesight is diminishing, it can be harder to read food labels, recipes, even to see the food. Sense of smell that can impact your appetite. Lack of mealtime assistance or a dining companion can make it harder or just less pleasant to consume food, and some people may choose, unfortunately, not to eat if that's the case. Fixed incomes can be a financial challenge to buying nutritious foods, and then sometimes when you're unable to as easily chew your preferred food, that can certainly be a challenge. But there are some things we can do to overcome these challenges. So one is use herbs and spices. If you're noticing that your senses are changing, your appetite is changing, maybe just try some different herbs or spices to improve the flavor, make it more appetizing. Stay on top of your healthcare, keep your annual well checks, your vision checks, your dental appointments. Maybe modify the texture of food. So maybe you used to really enjoy fresh vegetables, but you're finding that steaming them is more appealing or easier to eat. You can also, do some things to just make the eating environment a little bit more pleasant. Get out the best dishes or buy some flowers to put on the table if, the loneliness is a challenge, or you're just cooking for one or two. Learning how to modify recipes so you don't have leftovers upon leftovers. Maybe starting an eating club where you're sharing dishes with neighbors, for example. Or maybe just trying new recipes. Sometimes trying new things is a way to kind of get out of a rut. And then finally, thinking about fixed incomes. If you're looking for ways to save money, doing some meal planning. So you're utilizing what you already have on hand in your pantry and freezer, and not buying things that you don't need. Looking for specials or coupons. Nutrient-rich bargains kind of get at those foods that are really nutritious but don't cost a lot. Things like beans, perhaps, or tuna or eggs, peanut butter, frozen vegetables. So a few suggestions there if eating healthy on a fixed income is a challenge for you or someone you know. So with that kind of wraps up the session on nutrition and how it impacts memory. Again, I will credit the original authors of this program are from Texas A&M University, but I am happy to answer questions at this time. Oh, that's a really good question. So the question was, what's the difference between a dietitian and a nutritionist? Anyone can call themselves a nutritionist. I mean, seriously, you could go online today and get certification as a nutritionist. A dietitian is registered and licensed, so they've been through a college program that's accredited. They've taken a registration exam. They've done supervised practice. I have dietetic intern with me today who's finishing out her year of supervised practice. And then you have to complete continuing education to maintain your registration and licensure. Mhm. The question was about protein, and does protein help to limit hunger? Yeah, protein is important. And those diets, they don't limit protein as much as they emphasize plant-based proteins. So protein comes, we often think of protein as being meat, but protein is in beans, nuts and seeds, so peanut butter. And I always recommend to people, one of the best ways you can think about snacking throughout the day is pairing a fruit or vegetable with some sort of protein. So maybe it's apple slices and peanut butter. Maybe it's carrot sticks and hummus. Different combinations. So protein isn't always the meat. Protein can actually be found even in some of our grains, and it just adds up. If you're focusing on the plant-based sources, it does add up so that you're getting enough, but it is quite a mental shift if you're used to relying on the meat for protein. Yeah, even in that MyPlate, you notice that half the plate is fruits and vegetables. And I think that's something that we can all work towards. We're so accustomed to, when we're meal planning, thinking about the meat as the entree and then trying to figure out what to serve with it. And it's really a matter of kind of flipping it to say, like, what fruits and vegetables am I going to eat? And then what other components do I want to be part of this meal so that I am getting the protein and the carbohydrates and so forth. And Annalise and I were talking earlier, and for those online, she's my intern, that's out of view. But we were talking earlier about how our plates, they don't always, maybe not even often, look like a plate where everything is portioned into those quadrants. You can make a skillet meal, you can make a stew, you can make any one pot dish, and it can still follow those guidelines, but the emphasis is on what fruits and vegetables are going to be in the meal, what sort of grain is part of the meal, what sort of protein is part of the meal, and so forth. That's great. So the comment was about how this pandemic has presented a new opportunity to cook at home, and just the positive changes that have resulted, and using the library as a resource to check out cookbooks. So the question was about proteins and how plant-based proteins aren't complete proteins, whereas animal proteins are. And there used to be like recommendations, like pair this food with this food, for example, because if you eat the two together, you'll get a complete protein. And that's certainly one approach. The general consensus has kind of moved to, it's not as important to eat the pairs together at the same time to get a complete protein, if you're eating a variety throughout the day. So, for example, you wouldn't want to have black beans for lunch and black beans for dinner. You would, have, if you're eating vegetarian, no meat at all, maybe black beans and rice for lunch you're getting, and those, the rice would have some proteins to complement the black beans, and then for dinner have, something else, have, a different pea or legume or tofu or something different, and just aim for variety throughout the day and throughout the week. Yeah, so the conversation going on is about glycemic index, and you're absolutely right. I didn't name it as such when I was talking about those diet plans, but in addition to protein, fiber helps to keep us fuller longer. And so choosing your fruits and vegetables and whole grains that are higher in fiber, they do stick with us, and they also help keep us off that blood sugar roller coaster where you have that, that high and then that crash. It's a more steady release of energy. That's a good question. So the question is, what documentaries would I recommend? And I think I stopped watching documentaries like a decade ago, honestly. Like the food documentaries became like really trendy, and there's all these new ones. And sometimes they contain really good information. Sometimes it's just more, I think they're designed more to elicit an emotional response. But I think, the ones that, like, when you're watching those, kind of evaluate what foods they're promoting, and is it, the components of a healthy diet that we talked about today? Is it, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, lean protein, plant-based foods, or is it something else? Is someone, out there trying to preach about something else? Like GMOs is a really good example, because that topic is designed to elicit strong emotions. That's not what I talked about today. So you can kind of use your own critical thinking to consider who made it and why, and what's the message that they're trying to get across. I did just resurrect my Michael Pollan book, Food Rules. I don't know if anyone's familiar with that. It was published in 2009, so it's been around a little bit, but I was flipping through it a couple weeks ago because the American Heart Association revised their dietary guidance. They have dietary guidelines to promote heart health. And it's amazing because that book, even though it was written, over a decade ago now, is pretty much in line with the new Heart Association guidelines. So it was kind of a fun exercise for me to skim through that and just see how much truth there was even before, plant-based eating became as trendy as it is now. Yeah, this has been a really good discussion. We are at 2, so if anyone wants to slip out, that is totally fine, but I am free to hang around for those who want to keep talking.